back into open session on the part of the school committee.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Ask for a vote. Mr. Dakotas?
Yes.
Mrs. Pavo?
Yes.
Mrs. Farnworth?
Yes.
And I vote yes. We're back in open session. I'm going to report out. School committee met in executive session, received legal advice regarding the FY25 budget. I'm going to ask for a motion to seal the minutes.
So moved.
Your second?
Second.
Mr. Dakotas?
Yes.
Mrs. Pavo?
I'm going to abstain because I wasn't there.
Okay, yeah. Mrs. Farnworth?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Minutes are sealed. I'm going to turn the floor over to Mrs. deMedeiros to open the town council meeting.
I'd like to open the Monday, April 1st meeting of the Tiverton Town Council. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Clerk, would you like me to do roll call, or do you want to do
You
it?
didn't say that on my right ear, I'd be disappointed.
Councilor Melbourne?
Here.
Council Paul?
Present.
Councilor Edwards?
Present.
Councilor Scanlon? Oh, oh my God, Councilor Janik.
Present.
I'm present. Councilor Burke?
Present.
Okay, again, welcome to our April 1st meeting of the school committee. We are already open. I'd like to make a brief statement on behalf of the committee. First of all, I'll send the apologies of Mrs. Palish, who due to work obligations was not able to attend tonight. First, I'd like to welcome you all and our legislative delegation, as well as our colleagues from RIDE and the Department of Revenue. And just ask that everyone keep in mind to be respectful, professional, and ask questions and listen to answers in good faith. I don't know if that's me or not. You know, we've had a lot of meetings over the last couple weeks, and emotions are understandably high, but we remain committed to working together. I think if there is one thing that has come across clearly to all of us during these meetings is that the people would like the school committee, the budget committee, and the town council to work together to arrive at some solutions. Right now, we have two difficult options of closing a school or cutting staff, or cutting even more staff. And we continue to seek a third option, which we all need to try to find. Problems like this are always difficult. I certainly meet them in my professional life with some frequency. And I would ask everyone to please keep in mind that what we should all be trying to do is say, I see that there's a problem, you know, help me understand it better, and what can I do to help? And ultimately, even if we are not able to help, that we try to work together on what the solution is. So again, over the last 4 years, the school district has lost $1.7 million in state aid. 1.2 million of this is projected for just this year. Over those 4 years, that 1.7 million represents a 25% loss of state aid to the school district. And this year, that represents a 17% loss. So we are here to hear from RIDE, and also there's a lot of questions I know from the town and the town administrator. We just really received these this weekend, but we will try to answer them as completely and as fully as we can. But some of these questions might require additional meetings to fully understand. Again, we welcome our colleagues from RIDE, or the Rhode Island Department of Education, as well as the Department of Revenue. And that's all I have to say. So.
Thank you. Are there members of RIDE here in the audience? We understood they were coming.
There, can I speak?
There you are.
We're here on the screen. In fact, one of our presenters is waiting to be admitted. If Kristen Cole or someone could admit her into the meeting.
We can't hear you.
You can't
We
hear me?
can't, no. Well, it's muffled and, yeah, you can hear, but we can't hear.
You can't hear what I'm saying at this time?
All right, go ahead. Let's try. All right.
The problem is, the other night was the same way. I was in the audience and I could hear, but the school committee couldn't hear. So
don't know
this
if we
was a
can turn off
concern
our
of ours,
microphone.
having them come here this way. All right. Is he here?
So if I could just ask, we have one of our presenters who is waiting to be admitted into the meeting. Now I see that says no one is waiting to be admitted. So I just checked with the individual.
Danny, can you admit them? Yeah, okay, they should get admitted in a second.
Thank you. So, yeah, I see that. I think she's here now, Kristen Cole. So thank you for having us attend your meeting tonight. I'm Mark Dunham. I'm the Chief Financial Officer at the Department of Education. We also have the Chief of Operations, Mario Carino, with us, who is in charge of the School Building Authority, who might be able to answer some questions that you might have about the school, I guess Fort Barton School that you guys have been considering either closing or doing something with. We have Steve Coleman with us. He's the director and chief from the Department of Revenue, and they help us. They actually give us a lot of the data, the community wealth data, and the value of the property data. So we thought if there was some technical questions, he'd be able to help us out. And Kristen Cole, who puts the funding formula together for us at RIDE, will be doing the presentation and answer technical questions. We'll all be able to answer some questions. As someone had noted earlier, we did get quite a few questions today. And we think some of them will be answered in the presentation, and I think some of them will be answered by the group here, but we're certainly able to, the more involved questions, get those responses and send them to you, later on this week, or a couple of days or a day. So if it's okay with you, we can share our screen and start the presentation, which is designed to give you a general understanding. You're not going to understand the formula in one presentation, but just how the levers of the formula, the important parts of the formula, and what happened in Tiverton's case, specifically this year, where the losses of state aid came from. And then I'm sure you'll have some questions about that. So if it's a short presentation.
All right,
So
well,
if we
the
can get
questions we
started.
submitted, we certainly didn't expect full answers tonight, but we did have, these are some of our concerns. I'm Denise deMedeiros, I'm president of the town council, and my council is here with the school committee. You can start your presentation if you like.
Thank you.
I'm going to try to share my screen, see how this works.
Okay, looks good.
All right. Is it big enough like that, or should I view it as PowerPoint?
Do it as a PowerPoint.
Okay, let me see if I can.
We can see it.
Yeah, but PowerPoint was better.
See slideshow up there? Yeah.
Yeah, I can't, I've got the Zoom bar in my way. View.
There.
There you go. Okay, looks good.
As Mark said, I'm Kristen Cole, and I manage the state education aid programs at RIDE, and this is an overview of Tiverton's aid. So just for some background, the funding formula has three key components. There's a core instructional amount that's updated annually, a student success factor for additional student needs that aren't addressed in the core, and a state share ratio calculation for how the funding is split between the state and municipalities. The core instructional amount in the governor's budget is $12,335. This is a regional average of 4 New England states, Connecticut, Mass, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire. But the governor's budget has recommended a CPI inflation cap on the core. So this number reflects that 5-year annual average. The core includes instruction and administration expenditures, which is your staff, and supports like supplies, textbooks, and equipment. And there's an appendix in the back that gives additional detail about what's included in the core per pupil. The student success factor provides additional funding to support student needs beyond the core amount. The factor has been 40% of the core since the inception of the formula, which was in fiscal year 2012. This is applied to the poverty factor, which was switched in last fiscal year 2024 to be applied to the direct match from the Department of Human Services data. So this is families that are participating in the SNAP and TANF programs. And because that only captures the kids that qualify for free lunch, there's a factor that's applied to that number, which is 1.6, and that ties to other USDA programs. That factor is used in the community eligibility provision, which is a program run by the RIDE Nutrition Office that certain schools qualify for. So that the factor in the formula just matches what's currently used in other USDA programs. This slide gives an overview of how the formula is calculated prior to the state and local share calculation. So the formula uses average daily membership, which gives the community credit for each day that the student's an enrolled member. So all kids are multiplied by the core instructional amount, and then all kids that qualify for the poverty provision are multiplied against the student success factor. And that gives us a core instruction and student success total prior to the state and local share calculation. The state share ratio in the formula uses a quadratic mean formula, which just means that there's two components in the formula, and the calculation is going to weight where there's greater need. So first, we use the adjusted property values that we receive from Steve's office and municipal finance. And this just basically is a factor to determine the local's capacity to pay. That is also, we also consider in the state share ratio, student need too. So there is a poverty factor in this. And in Tiverton's case, the numbers are very similar. So the weighting isn't going strongly one way or the other. The property values are somewhat similar to the poverty number, which generates your state share ratio. Each community's data is compared to the state average. So if a community's property values have stayed fairly constant and the rest of the state has gone down, then that's going to generate a lower state share ratio in the community. This slide just gives a little background of how Tiverton compares to some of the other coastal communities. This formula that's used in the funding formula, or at least the property value component, has been in state law since 1960. So a variation of this formula is used in housing aid, had been used in the previous operations education aid program prior to the funding formula. So the actual property value calculation has been around for a long time and isn't new. This table, as I said, shows how Tiverton's comparing to some of the other communities. So if the funding formula didn't account for student need, there are 9 communities that the state share ratio would be 0%. So when I was counting earlier, there's about 12 communities that are kind of deemed coastal communities. 9 of those communities calculate at 0% with the property value portion of the formula. So the only reason those communities are getting state aid is because of the student need for the students that are served in those communities. And Tiverton is, of the 12 communities that I would say are coastal, only Bristol, Middletown, and Tiverton result in a state share percent. So, and Tiverton's actually the highest of the coastal communities. Most of them would get 0%, like I said, from the state share if we didn't consider student need. So this just is giving an overview of the property value piece, and then it's further adjusted for student poverty. So this is an overview of the changes in Tiverton's aid. There's been a series of hold harmlesses and various changes in the laws that have been made over the last few years just to get us post-pandemic So in fiscal year '22, the student data should have been updated to March 21 student data, but because every community in the state lost students during the pandemic, the legislature froze the student data at the greater of March 20 or 21 data in the formula. So that the number for fiscal year '22 already had a frozen student data component. And then in fiscal year '23, the issues were exacerbated because not only did they freeze the student data in the calculation, they also froze the state share ratios. So I put a note here, if these provisions hadn't been enacted in fiscal year '23, the student data would have dropped to 1,678 students, and the state share would have dropped to 29.9%. In fiscal year '24, and the next slide, I'll go over the funds that were enacted to kind of transition back to live student data, but give ease into it a little bit, just gave some funding to soften the decreases for affected communities. And then in fiscal year '25, a lot of those funding sources are ending, or where the student data is just continuing to go down, so it's resulted in additional losses. So I just kind of touched upon this. There were two primary changes that were made by the 2024 legislature. One was to enact a student enrollment loss transition fund. So if your student data is less than the prior year, the community will get 40% of the lost aid in the first year and 25% in the next fiscal year. So this has stayed fairly constant for Tiverton. There was a small, or a $27,000 increase in that funding. The one that's causing the primary change in funding this year is the Poverty Loss Stabilization Fund, which the name's a little misleading because it's linked to the state share ratio. It really isn't related to poverty loss. So in that case, if the state share declines by more than 2%, we actually run the formula using the prior year state share ratios, and the community will get 50% of the lost aid. So last year that was about $788,000 for Tiverton. And this year, because all the data components get updated, you still fall into the state share going down by more than 2%, but the change in aid from the prior year is much less. So that's the bulk of the aid loss is related to the update to this fund that was enacted last year. And as I noted here, the data is updated annually and the funding doesn't carry over from year to year. So this is kind of just a 1 year softening, I guess, of the loss in the funding, but it wasn't guaranteed for future years. Another change in the funding is just a change in an update the high cost special education categorical aid. So there's a supplemental fund that helps support costs for special education students where the costs exceed 4 times the core foundation amount. So in fiscal year '25, that amount is $69,076. And any student who where the costs exceed that amount, the state begins to pick up some of that share. So the costs have to be net any reimbursements received from other funding sources such as Medicaid. So in fiscal year '25, the net eligible costs were lower than the previous year. So that resulted in about the $380,000 change in funding.
Could you tell me why that occurred? Why
Data
that decrease?
the data submitted, the students served were, the number of students served were roughly the same. There was a particular student that dropped off that was relatively high cost, but the data submitted for fiscal year '24 did not show any reimbursements. So the base used in the calculation was much higher than this year.
So saying there was no reimbursements for Medicaid?
I can't speak to whether there were reimbursements or not. The data we received didn't have reimbursement shown.
Are they supposed to report their Medicaid funds?
Yes.
Thank you.
And so all the calculations, every time there's a shift in the budget, so when the governor's numbers come out in January, when the legislature ultimately enacts a budget, usually in June, we put all the information on RIDE's website, and it's ride.ri.gov. There's a funding and finance tab, and under that you can pick funding sources, state education aid, and there's two like accordion boxes on there. The first has the entitlements each and tuition rates, things like that might be of interest to folks in the community. And the second is all the supporting calculations. So anything additional data about how the state share ratio is calculated, things like that are on our website if anybody would like to see and go look at that further. And the appendices in this are just for your reference, the types of costs that are included in the core instructional amount. And then there's an additional slide on the other categorical programs that are part of the funding formula. One of the ones that has been increasing fairly significantly is the Multilingual Learner Fund, which is not a huge amount for Tiverton, but it has been increasing.
Thank you, Kristen. That's the presentation. You might need to refer to some of those slides later. I don't know if you want to take them down, but so I guess at this point we can, however you want to handle any questions on your end, how you determine them. Some of them we might not be able to answer on the spot, but many of them I'm sure we will.
Sure, I do want to question the Medicare money. Medicaid, I'm sorry, I'm a nurse, we deal with
Yeah,
Medicare.
could we put the slides back up? Because I think a lot of us have some questions about some of the numbers.
Okay,
in them.
yeah, could we put those slides back up? We did not get any reimbursements for our students last year. I don't know who can answer this on.
Well, that's not exactly what we said, but
What did
in
you
that
say?
particular group. So there's a group of students that have to exceed the threshold of 69,000, whatever that was,
Correct.
$69,000. And when you list those students and you submit them to us for reimbursement, you have to take away any Medicaid reimbursements you received on behalf of those students. And if I recall, this year in 25, there are about $375,000 worth of Medicaid reimbursements, but in 24, it was only about $75,000. So we don't know if the children were eligible or not, but that's just how it or if they missed some. But the big difference there is a very expensive student is no longer in the district, and the Medicaid reimbursement increased to $375,000, which decreased the amount of money that would be reimbursed by RIDE. The 188 is very consistent with what has been requested and received in the past. So it seems like the 567 was an anomaly.
So if I could kind of understand that, when you have FY24 there, the 567, 498, that's what the district received in high-cost special education. Could you go back to that slide? Yeah. So for this fiscal year, so what we're in, FY24.
Correct.
And then what is projected in the governor's budget for FY25 is $188,000. So basically a $379,000 decrease, and that's attributable to one student leaving the district?
It's attributable mostly to a difference in the amount of reimbursements included in the formula. We take, I should say, all the information that is in the formula comes from the school district or the town. All
Right.
the assessment data comes from the town, all the enrollment data comes from the school district. In this case, the request for the high-cost special ed reimbursement is submitted through, we have the UCOA codes. There's certain select UCOA codes. They're added up. There's a total. They do it by student. The students, we have no student names. They do it by student, and they add it up, and they reduce each one by the amount of Medicaid reimbursement that was received. And looking at this year's, because we saw the big difference, there was $375,000 of Medicaid reimbursements noted by the town, by the school district, and received in 24, and there was less than $90,000 in, I got it backwards,
No,
in
you got it
25, and less
backwards.
than $90,000 in 24. So the big difference there is not so much the number of students, it's the amount of reimbursement that was reported and received and reported.
Mark, could you just do us a favor, because I know there's some folks who don't understand some of the lingo that we use, so can you explain what UCOA means, what it stands for, and what it is?
Sure, it's the Unified Chart of Accounts. Every school district in the state has to report their expenditures in the same manner, using the same accounting code, so that when we compare, it's available on our website, or you can compare your expenditures, Tiverton to Middletown to Portsmouth to Newport, to any state, any school department in the state. So it's an accounting system that we use.
I guess I'm still struggling to understand exactly how the number changed, and I don't
Me
know
too.
if Peter or Amy, you could help us understand that a little bit.
So what you're saying is we got 75,000 in Medicare reimbursements in 2023, and in 2024, 375. So if we lost a very expensive student, how did that happen?
Yeah, Amy or Peter, I
I know.
don't know, Amy maybe.
You know what I'm saying?
Huh? Sarah, whoever might be best equipped to answer the question. Yeah.
Where is Sarah?
Sarah Krager, Mrs. Krager. You want to come up to the podium? Do you think you can answer this question?
You want me to answer? Is this on? There we go. So on the high-cost special ed, we may have other students who have received Medicaid reimbursements but don't rise above the threshold.
Okay.
So we only get reimbursed, for students above that specific threshold. So when we calculate, we put in everything, but not everything is applicable necessarily. So on the worksheets, we do put all of our reimbursements in there. I can tell you that the one for the current year was prepared by the region when we were in the region, because there's a 2-year lag between the high-cost special ed for FY25 is based on FY23 data.
Right.
So on and so forth. So
But this doesn't make any sense. How could it go from 75 to 375? So,
because it's based on the eligible
yeah, I
students.
understand. I was there, and I understand, but it's still,
I'm not following what your question is.
yeah.
So maybe Mrs. Krager can
Yeah,
actually
maybe,
help us.
maybe she can.
Is this on?
Yep.
So I know Mr. Dunham had stated that the reimbursement is just through Medicaid. It's any third-party reimbursement, so it's not just Medicaid. There's also other reimbursements, like if we were to use any sort of grant funds for that reimbursement. So it's Medicaid plus our consolidated resource plan. So we were reimbursed through the consolidated resource plan and/or Medicaid.
And those numbers aren't reportable?
And those numbers, they come off when we report the students. We report if they were given Medicaid reimbursement and our consolidated resource plan reimbursement. So that's included, and then it's taken off the total amount, Mrs. deMedeiros. So then those numbers are lower if you're reimbursed. You can't be reimbursed through Medicaid, CRP, and through high-cost special ed funds. It comes from one.
But when the formula only counts the Medicaid.
No, third
Am I
party,
wrong?
any
That's what I
third-party
want.
reimbursement.
Okay, all right. All right.
So Sarah, by third party, that's inclusive of IDEA? That's what is in the CRP?
In the CRP,
Yeah,
exactly.
okay. So did our IDEA funding go down?
No, we just moved money over to that reimbursement part, that reimbursement section. Is that fair to say, Amy?
So individuals with, yeah. Can you explain IDEA?
So individuals with disability, there
And
is some reimbursement for certain teaching, instruction, curriculum, and you can use reimbursement for students who receive their services at high cost.
So for those, it's federal money that comes into the
Exactly.
state and then is
Exactly.
distributed out to the
Yep.
cities and towns
Yep.
based
So
on
if we
formulas.
use that on students at high cost, we can't
that money comes off, that final high cost. So like I said, if they're reimbursed through Medicaid, that comes off that bottom line. If they receive the reimbursement through CRP, it comes off the bottom line. And then the fact that there was a student who left that was high cost was significant.
So,
If I may, without putting Sarah or anybody on the spot, there are people, students, who have specific, very special needs that can be very costly. And we want to make sure that they're supported to the best of our ability and to what they need to be supported at. So yes, there are students who can be costly. And I'm hesitant about talking about one student, even though we're not naming names.
we're not naming the names, but.
I agree.
All right. Do you have any?
Yeah, I guess I'm still struggling to understand
struggling with
how
this.
that changed that dramatically year over year.
It was just really from that 1 year.
Okay.
Like Mr. Dunham said, the numbers were about the same. I think it differed from 10 students to 8 students. The two students, again,
Yeah.
assuming confidentiality, did have some significant needs.
You-
They are no longer in district. And then when we looked at those reimbursements, like I said, it's third-party reimbursement. So you can get it through Medicaid, CRP, or through this.
So theoretically, then, there's actually a savings, but so if our state aid is going down in the high-cost special education because we had either reimbursement from somewhere else.
Yep, that's it.
Or a student who had a particularly
Correct.
high-cost IEP or whatever it was, out-of-district placement, no longer is in the district, then theoretically there is a cost savings, although projected for 2025
exactly,
is that
2
our
years.
special education is still going up by $1 million. So in a way, the way to understand that is our special education cost increase for FY25 would be yet even higher
If we didn't
if
have
we,
that.
if we had not had that other revenue
Reimbursement,
stream
that third
and/or
party.
certain students with high-cost special education needs hadn't left the district.
Right,
So-
if you didn't have the third-party reimbursement or the students didn't leave the
Got it.
district.
Okay, all right.
So that would have
think
been a known revenue loss that we could anticipate, because we knew that students were leaving that.
Depending, yeah.
Yeah, that were,
Depends on when
that
you knew
we were
that.
getting a lot of
Right.
reimbursement.
Depends on when you knew the overall IEP profile of the district was
Right.
changing. And
Right.
that could have been July, August, September.
Oh, so this is FY23 data.
Right, which is another issue.
There's a 2-year lag.
So,
So we
Right.
use FY23 data as a
Right.
basis for FY25
That's correct. FY23 submission.
submission, yep.
So Amy, what is the fund balance on our Medicare right now, on our Medicare fund?
A Medicaid.
I'm sorry, on the Medicaid fund. How much money do we have in there right now?
So I guess technically 0. We were reimbursed by the region for all of our Medicaid funds, so that comes in as revenue.
So there's
Right.
nothing in your Medicare fund right now, Medicaid fund right now? Nothing, it's 0. The balance is 0. Is that what you're saying?
Plus whatever we get for the current year, which I don't have a total for that right now.
But you're getting that in, correct?
Yes.
That's
We are.
coming in.
It averages roughly
No, I'm just
200,000 a year.
curious.
Yes, we are getting that in, but we received all of our Medicaid money from the region when it dissolved.
So when we get the actuals that we asked for, we'll see that that fund balance right now is 0. Because
I'm sorry.
we did put a request in for all your actuals on all your budgets, line items. So when that Medicaid number comes in, is that going to be 0, or is that going to show money in there?
It will show money for this year.
But you have no idea what that is right now.
Not off the top of my head, no, I don't.
All right, thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
So,
That might have been me.
okay,
I think it was me.
thank you. These are pretty powerful microphones. So I just have a quick question for my friends at RIDE, since they're here. I did go on your website while you were talking, went to the finance side. and tried to pull up the data from, I know we're 2 years behind, so 23, 24 is the budget, I guess, that we're working on. Looks like every other district in the state, minus Tiverton, has actually submitted. Tiverton hasn't done that yet. Do you guys have a typical date range when Tiverton submits the 23, 24 data? Or I guess it would be from 22, 23. I'm just curious as to how we're basing a lot of these facts and figures if RIDE doesn't possess the data, or at least have it published.
We have not.
Well, we do our calculations without the actual submission of the Tiverton budget. I believe, and maybe Steve, you can help me with this, because I think it's part of the DOR requirements too. Is it 90 days or 60 days after the budget's passed? It's supposed to be uploaded? Can you comment on that?
Are we talking about adopted budget survey and that type of data?
I believe because it's not on our website, and it should be, I guess, at this point. I don't know who's up to date on our website or not in that regard.
So I'm not sure what's new, but there is the requirement for an adopted budget survey to be submitted by the school and municipality 30 days after final adoption.
So are we like way out of compliance then? Because I'm looking at this, it says it's the Rhode Island LEA budgets, 23, 24. It looks like Tiverton and East Providence are the only two major districts, and you have a couple of charters in there. Everybody else has their data uploaded, and with the exception of Johnson, I guess that's currently being validated.
So that, Mr. Edwards, that falls on me. So we, as you know, we have a new accounting system, and we had some difficulty closing FY23, and now that that is done, I have not yet provided them with the budget, but will do so shortly now that the audit's been issued. That's entirely on me.
I'm looking at your Medicaid funds for 2021. It says 675,000. 2022 is 0. 2023 is 0. 2024 is 636,778.
I don't know what you're looking at.
Your budget.
Okay.
So I'm reading from your budget. And that's what, I'm confused on why 22 and 23 says 0. And this says 637,778 right now.
Because those Medicaid
And the fund
funds.
balance for Medicaid right now is 636,777.
Okay, so those are Medicaid funds that were drawn down from the region. So when the region held those funds, we did not record it as revenue until we actually took those funds. So we did not take in 23 and 24, and we plan to take 676 from fund balance and Medicaid, which we have received from the region thus far.
Right, so this is one-time funds.
Correct.
And you're taking, so when I asked you what was in Medicare, you didn't know, but your Medicaid.
I'm sorry, we actually, so,
But it's right here.
are you going to let me finish?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. So, up until FY24, all of our Medicaid funds were managed and handled by the region. And the district was only required to record it as revenue when we got a disbursement from that fund, okay? So when the budget was prepared, the school committee authorized use of 670-something thousand from both fund balance and Medicaid. So in the interim, we have received our full Medicaid balance from the region, and that has been recorded as revenue and will be used to offset the budget.
So I'd like to go back to so we sort of understand a little bit about how the high-cost special education, because again, we're trying to understand how the state aid decreased. So if we go to the next slide, I think, on your guys' presentation. Maybe?
Dr. Larkin,
I'm trying.
while they're pulling that up, I just have a really quick question, should be easy to answer. Are we using a cash or accrual basis for accounting?
Cash.
Okay.
Except for the enterprise funds, and those are accrual.
Why are we not doing everything accrual or everything cash? That's,
Because under GAAP, it's required to be cash.
okay.
Which slide, this one or the,
Maybe go back.
I think the one with the one more,
mean,
that's it. I think that one. I think you go ahead one more, Kristen.
No, it
you
was,
wanted,
so
there
basically.
was only one on the high
there
cost
were-
special ed.
All right, go to the other ones, that's what I'm to talk about.
Nope, maybe before, nope.
How about this one here? It shows the 681
Yeah,
loss.
I think that, yeah. So the other, so actually on the top slide, it says Student Enrollment Loss Transition Fund. So FY '24, 131,000. FY '25 projection is actually higher. So the way I'm reading that is we're actually $27,000 over our FY '24 enacted aid in terms of the governor's recommended FY '25. Do I have that right?
Yes, because it's going to be 40% of the loss of students related to fiscal year 25 plus the 25% from last year. So if you continue to lose the same percentage of students, then the funding should kind of level off at this around the
Okay.
159,000.
But this would imply, which is not how I understood it previously, but this is implying that there's no loss in terms of the $1.2 million, because that's, again, this is what we're trying to understand, is why we lost to 1.2 million, which is a percentage out of whack with every other community in Rhode Island. So in this, that part of that slide to me says that there's no component of that $1.2 million that's actually attributed to loss of enrollment. Is that right?
There is, but the percentage of loss is much lower. So when it was calculated last year, it was comparing March 23 data to March of 20. So you were getting like a 3-year adjustment for student loss.
Right,
The
okay.
Fiscal year 25 governor is comparing March, well, in his budget, he used October 23 as a baseline, but it ultimately will be March 24 to March 23. So I think the change in students is around 30 or something like that. It's not as significant as going from 1758 to, 1600 or whatever it was.
But so you're getting 40% of the students you lost 2 years ago. So you're losing 60% of that money. So you are losing money. It's just, and you're getting 25% of the students that you lost, I guess.
That is how I understood it originally, but
So all we're comparing
But
here
the
is what you
slide seems to
got
be
last
saying
year and
something
what you're
different.
going to get this year,
Right.
which is about the same. But you
Right.
are losing money because you're losing the rest of the balance of those, of what you would get for those students.
right, okay, all right.
So
A portion of the 1.2 million is just the funding formula. So if none of these funds had ever been created, the funding formula change was about $200 and some thousand loss. So these funds are coming in as supplemental after the formula calculation. And we've added on the website, there's actually a formula aid reconciliation file because now these funds are all embedded into the funding formula account. So it gets a little confusing now to try to figure out the formula aid. So there is a reconciliation of the numbers that's going into the formula aid.
So to be clear, that had there not been that transition fund from the legislature, we would have shown a deficit there, correct?
Had these funds not been here, you would have had the roughly $1 million change last year.
Yeah.
So it delayed it a year, and now it's the hit is coming in fiscal year 25.
So it's also going to affect next year.
It won't, if the governor's numbers hold, obviously the loss would be this about 270,000. It wouldn't be as big as,
But it still would be a loss.
yes.
Okay, and then down to the bottom part of that slide, where FY '24, $780,000, essentially for supporting children in poverty, is decreased to $106,000, so that is a loss. It's in parentheses of $681,000. And that is because of decreasing rates in poverty, even though actually, the calculation seems to try and account for children who are not captured when you multiply it by 1.6. Do I have that right?
The calculation's actually tied to the state share ratio, so I don't know the intent of the legislature if it was meant to be tied to poverty loss. But this is kind of where changes in your property values, the whole E-wave calculation that comes from municipal finance is embedded in the state share. So it could be, poverty loss could be a factor, but I don't, Tiverton's
Okay.
poverty didn't change that much. So the state share is going down because of changes in the property value and loss of kids.
Kristen, can you go back one more slide? I think it'll help explain it. Could you show, can you talk about,
Yeah.
you'll see the change in that this is trying to mitigate. It frees up.
It freezes, I think, and I can't move it, so I have to. I
All
think
right,
stop
do
that
you mind
again.
doing that?
Stop it and share it again.
I think the next slide, that when we show that slide, you'll see the intent of that legislation.
This
I don't
one,
know if you want to explain it or not, but what that big savings is, this is the reduction that you had when you went from, I think it's 33 to 25, is that correct? So you see how the share ratio dropped?
So actually our total FY23 to 24 went down, I think, 300,000. So just to recap it, we went down 600,000 from FY21 to 22. FY22, that was, though these numbers look a little bit different.
400.
I want to say we were at 7.4 in either 21 or 22, and then we went down 600, but then some of that was recouped, and then we went down 300,000 last year, and then 1.2 million this year. So
yeah, so 23 is the year, if it had been calculated with 1678, the actual student count, and 29.9% state share ratio, it obviously wouldn't have been 7.2 million. It would have been somewhere, probably closer to 6.9.
Mm-hmm. Which is what it was last year, and now we're going down to 1.2, okay, or by 1.2 million.
But is this based on loss of students?
That's part of it, yeah.
Correct?
That's part of it.
Okay.
So the other part is that, and I don't know if you guys are in a position to answer this, but the total value of the real estate in the town went from 2 billion in around, I think it was FY21, to 2.7 billion in the current fiscal year, which is a 33% rise over the course of 4 years. There were not similar rises in the other communities, at least in the East Bay, Portsmouth, Middletown. That's one of the things that I continue to struggle with, is that our property values, or the total value of the real estate of the town, would have risen that dramatically in that short a period of time, but not risen as dramatically in the other towns.
So Steve or Kristen, I think the issue there is that ratio is a state ratio comparison, not just simply to local towns and school districts.
But they are still also compared to the state too.
Right, but I think one of the other slides showed that their share was actually less.
But why did property values go, and I think that's what Jerry is getting at, why did they go so high in Tiverton and not as high anywhere?
Was there a similar increase in Portsmouth? Like, did they have a 33% rise in their real value from 21 to 24 or 25?
So I spoke with Steve Coleman and his staff with our assessor when we looked at this number originally, and we were told that a lot of it had to do with our revaluation. Some of these other communities are not revaluing at the same time that we do, but average-wise, as they do reval, they wind up with the same type of increases. Excuse me?
So can we devalue?
No, we can when the property goes down, but it's a formulary that.
Yeah, but
that
doesn't,
works. Not everybody revals at the same time.
but don't we have to reval every 3 years? And every community has to reval, but it's on different years?
Different years. And what Steve had told us is that our target, our values were right on target compared to every other reval. It just happens that ours happened to be the year that was the true reval, not the statisticals that had happened. And that the other communities in the area are not on the same cycle we are. But they will catch up very similar to us. So I don't know if Steve Coleman's on, if he could speak to that, but I think that we addressed that with them.
Is Steve Coleman there?
He is.
Yes, I am. So I get to speak to some of the questions. So, specifically as it relates to the study that we just completed this last period for fiscal year 25, Tiverton's share of assessments, which reflects their wealth, didn't really change by much from 24 to 25. And to your question related to, the reval cycle and how we take that into account when we're doing the study, first, you're right. There is essentially a 9-year cycle. Once every 3 years, the third and the sixth year, you're doing a statistical update, and in the ninth year, you're doing a full reevaluation. And because of that cycle, we actually end up adjusting all municipalities by sales data. So each municipality in the state submits a sales file reflecting all the sales that occurred within that time period for the study purposes. And we evaluate those sales to determine whether or not those assessments that you're currently sending tax bills on are, within market activity, right? So in the case of the last study, Tiverton assessments were pretty close to, what you would expect following a reval or update. We do what's called a sales ratio. And essentially, if you had a sales ratio of 100%, it would mean that your market activity is equal to your assessments, meaning that the tax bill that goes out is exactly the same. We would expect a ratio somewhere around 90%, depending on what the market activity is at that point in time. And as everybody's aware, the market activity has been pretty high, even in 12/31/20. And there was about 93%, which we would expect following a reval or update. If, for example, Tiverton were 2 years removed, and you'll see this in the study prior to the last one, in the market that has an increase in values, and the market activity is such that all these assessments, once they go through a reval, would actually see an increase in the billing, you would see a lower ratio. So you could see in the prior study, it was around 80-something%, low 80s, prior to the reval. So again, we're doing this for everybody in the state and evaluating sales. And based on the sales information, it appeared that the sales ratio produced for the last study for fiscal year 25 education aid was within line of what we would expect. And again, the change, and I'd had to go into the details of the whole formula itself, but the end result is that we redistribute the value based on sales and also median family income. And that supposedly under law would reflect wealth. And essentially, we redistribute an assessment so you get a piece of the pie, so to speak. And Tiverton's piece of the pie didn't change by very much at all. You would expect, on the high end, low end, as one standard deviation from the mean, you're looking at about 5 to 7% change. Tiverton was 0.14%. So they barely changed based on the evaluation of sales data and median family income.
So Steve, the other piece I'd like you to speak to is, while the value of the town may have gone up, we're still limited by the law that limits what we can raise the levy by. So
yeah, so there's a 4% levy cap under law, also something that my division deals with. And it's a simple equation, right? You have assessments divided by 1,000 times the tax rate. Whatever the resulting number is of levy, you put them all together, that's your total levy. And the law states that you can't increase the levy by more than 4% in the prior year. So if your assessments dramatically increase, because that formula of assessment divided by 1,000 times tax rate, the tax rate's going to have to drop to be able to stay within that 4% cap.
Correct.
So there's a built-in mechanism for tax rates and also tax bills to stay within, that 4% range. Obviously, there's winners and losers, because some assessments go up by more, or the tax rate that applies to the assessment is advantageous.
It basically is a redistribution of the actual levy to the winners and losers.
Correct.
Yes, except to the extent that then is factored into the calculation of state aid. If, again, it's sort of similar to redistributing the tax burden based on the value of the town it's true, you know, depending, if your property went up a lot, then you wind up paying a little bit more taxes. If it goes down a lot, you pay less taxes. What doesn't seem to have happened is the same revaluation statewide, so that similar communities are not receiving the same decrease. And most of the, increase, most of the increase of the value, I agree, did not occur in the last 12 months. It was 21 to 22 to 23.
May I ask a question?
Yeah,
Mr.
sure.
Chair? Gentlemen, either at RIDE or Mr. Coleman, could you comment on, with respect to the state aid formula, the impact of tax effort in a particular city or town? And
Yeah, actually, for the purpose of the study and
Tax
how it feeds into
effort.
education aid, there is no tax effort that's taken into account. The assessments are what dictates the outcome of the formula. So we're starting with assessments, but as far as the application of tax rate or how much money could be generated from the assessments isn't taken into account. We adjust by sales, but then also median family income we're adjusting by, which is another factor that is taken into account. You could have a really high change in your median family income compared to the state, and that's going to dictate an outcome for education aid that may reflect that you need or would result in a reduction. But again, for the last study, Tiverton didn't have a change.
So toward that end, you alluded to, and my understanding is that actually part of the issue for loss of state aid is because the median income in Tiverton went up. Can you address that with a little bit more specificity in terms of the trend and what the numbers are?
Yeah, so I'd have to take a look at the data points specifically for the 2 periods in time, but I can tell you that based on the last study, Tiverton's median family income was 108,000. And the data that we derive is based on the 5-year census data. For the most recent census information was derived in December of 22. And it's utilized for the entire state. And that's compared to the median family income for the entire state, not just the average, but the entire state. And the state was at 95,000. And, if you have a higher ratio between the median family income compared to the state, then you're going to reflect more wealth. And, the lower, it goes the opposite direction. You actually it's more advantageous for education aid. But again, I'd have to take a look at the figures between the 2 periods in time to determine how much of a change there was. But I can tell you that's what it was for the last study.
All right, Mr. Scungio? Yeah.
Mr. Coleman, what steps could Tiverton take to increase the state share?
So it's formula driven, right? So the information that is utilized for the study is all derived from what the municipality is submitting into based on assessment information and what we're deriving from the census, the federal census. So as far as I know, there's no mechanism in place for you to manipulate the amount of assessments or the median family income. The assessments should be the assessments based on fair market activity and the work that's done between the assessor and any vendor that's hired to do this work. There's very little manipulation that occurs, or should be occurring.
Thank you.
And also just add one little piece that the wealth is part of the formula is wealth per student. I've seen that on a different slide in here. So as the enrollment drops, the wealth per student would, even if your wealth just stayed the same, would increase, which would reduce your share ratio and demonstrate a greater ability to pay in the town's spots. So the wealth is actually measured per student, not per capita or per, it's per student in the school system. So if those numbers are dropping, then the wealth, and your wealth even just stays the same, you're going to show increased wealth, less state share ratio. If these numbers are dropping of enrollment and your wealth is going up, well, that would be the perfect storm for a drop state share ratio, which I think is what you're experiencing here.
And just to add, and Kristen had touched upon it in one of the slides, she had shown a slide where it showed 0% for a number of municipalities. So when you all are talking about comparisons between municipalities and how come, you guys are getting impact compared to others, our study, the AWAB itself, impacts a municipality when they have something above 0. So on that slide, you saw that the majority, and I think she pointed out that 9 of the 12 coastal communities had 0. So for example, Newport is one of those municipalities where they have 0 for the SSRC. And if they were to have a doubling in their assessment, for example, it would have no impact on education aid because they would be completely covered by the formula for the poverty in pre-K through 6. So you're just outside, at 27.9, which means a small fluctuation in our study would result in a larger impact for you, as opposed to Woonsocket, for example, where they're a very low wealth per student, and they would have very little change in the education funding formula as a result of our study.
And if, so the local levy is restricted at 4%, a loss in educational aid in no way affects that cap. So if, we got 6.9, if we had a $3 million loss in state education aid, that's well past 4% of the 2024 budget. There's no accommodation for that. There's no sort of way that changes, correct? It has no impact on that cap. I think I know the answer.
So I would say that it has no impact on the formula itself, the resulting revenue you're going to generate from those assessments. However, if you're referring to the levy cap and the exemptions that you can derive, non-property tax revenue loss, which would include education, would be something you could apply to go above the cap.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah.
John?
So, couple of quick questions here. So you showed that slide that showed the students used in the student aid formula, and there was that period where we were held harmless, it looks like for FY22 and 23. Obviously, I'm assuming the hold harmless was going to end at some point, and was that ever communicated to Tiverton, and if so, when? And then the follow-up question to that is, clearly we're seeing a precipitous drop in the number of enrolled students. Does RIDE anticipate that trend to continue, and how is that going to impact us relative to the other 13 communities in our peer group?
Well, to answer your first question, we don't know until like June what's going to happen with the formula. So, for example, we couldn't really, when we released the formula, we let everybody know that this is what it is now, and there are certain things that you just can't count on going forward. But for example, the whole harmless was enacted in June of the last couple of years by the General Assembly, because that's when they passed the budget. I think the governor might have had some rendition of a whole harmless in there, but the final one was done by the General Assembly each of the last 2 Junes. So I think they made it clear by last year when they started to phase it out that they weren't going to do it again, but we actually don't know until June. So so last year when they sort of put up that off ramp, when you saw it was clear, they said it was 40%, 25%, and 0. So we were able to give 40% of the loss the first year, 25 the second year, and 0 the third year of a lost student, and that would continue. So that is in the formula here. But this is sort of, I think, the end of the whole harmless. And I think, even though it's 40, 25, and 0 this year and maybe next year, that might go away pretty soon, too. So I think we try and prepare everyone that these here are just ways to try and mitigate the losses due to the pandemic. And the enrollment just, in some places, just never came back for reasons we don't know. And we don't know why it's not coming back. I don't think we have. RIDE does not have the information to say,
So is it fair to say, from your perspective, that the school district should have been aware that the state aid numbers were going to drop because you were holding us at 1,758 students from 2021, and here we sit at just under 1,600?
With our crystal ball.
I don't know how they interpreted that, and I don't know.
But Mark, and I appreciate that you don't know the final numbers until the legislature passes the budget. However, given that this was hold harmless, I kind of equate it to if I inherit $10,000 from a relative who passes away, I don't plan getting that another 3 years in a row because I only have that $10,000. So if I know that this was special funding or a special addition to the formula that was added by the legislature, maybe a couple years in a row, I should not be depending on that every year. I should be building my budget thinking that that money's not going to be there.
Well, it would come back if the enrollment came back. So, you know,
Right.
I think all the business managers, and we preach pretty much to be conservative and with this type of stuff, because year to year, you never know what the revenue looks like.
Anybody down that end? No. Anything else?
Anyone else from the school committee? Questions, comments? Ms. Farnworth?
Just to clarify for one last time on the hold harmless portion of the provision, how much of the drop in state aid was attributed to the drop of 40 to 25% this year?
Well, in that particular one, I think there was no drop at all, right? Yeah, so you stayed pretty constant.
Okay.
That's the top little bar. The big drop was below that.
Okay.
And that's where we're trying to show the other share, where you had a pretty significant drop in share ratio.
Right.
I think from 33 to 25. So that's 788, and you see it was half of that. Now this year, your drop is like from 25 to 24, I think, so it's a lot less.
Okay.
So what this first 78 was trying to do was you would have had $1.5 million drop last year. It tried to give you half of it back. And it gave you half of it back, but only for 1 year. So now you're really feeling that, 2 years worth of, you should have really felt it last year, I guess, if the formula wasn't constructed with this new funding source that tried to mitigate it.
Thank you.
Mark, my name is Mike. I'm part of the school committee. I had a question for you, and this is maybe a little different than some of the questions you're getting, but it's more of a curiosity question for me. Have you had other school committees or towns request meetings like we're doing tonight? Would this be the first that you've done, or are there more lined up like that we're requesting?
There's no more lined up. We did. I think the reason why we're here a little bit is because Middletown reached out in February and asked us to do something like this. So we did the same presentation, except there was some Middletown slides in there. And I think the two superintendents spoke, and we ended up here. So these are the two we've done. We get telephone calls and questions, they're at the office, for sure, if someone's aid drops. And a lot of the aid has dropped this year. It has, because the stabilization, the enrollment just isn't coming back in a lot of places, and so now they're starting to feel the real pain.
Right. So I guess that's the second part of what I was maybe asking. So the phone calls, maybe not the presentations, is a lot of the state is feeling the drop in students overall. So there's a lot of questions from either finance director, superintendent, school committees, towns, administrators, with the same sort of questions about this is something that we're going to get used to. It's probably, most towns and communities are going to lose more students, not gain them back. Is that a fair statement? Or the trend?
It's been the trend, yeah. Yeah, we don't know what might happen next year with different, I don't know, immigration or whatever, who knows, but the trend has been a decline even before the pandemic, but it really was accelerated and never returned. We don't know where the students really are, they're not in Rhode Island.
Okay. Thank you. That's helpful. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Although I think it is important to recognize a couple of things. One is that the population of Rhode Island in general is aging, and that's probably true of Tiverton as well. The state almost lost a congressional district in the last reapportionment. So I think even though I think the state's population is more or less constant, but older, but the population growth in the country in general is in other places than New England. So make of that what we will.
Mark?
Yes.
So the Tiverton School District have stated they're operating in a deficit, a structural deficit, for the years 2020-2021, 21-22, 22-23, and 23-24. Now, is that reportable to RIDE, or do you feel that they are in a deficit that's reportable to you?
It's not officially reportable to RIDE. We do a risk assessment, and we do send out a survey in the spring to try and assess the financial condition of the LEAs, the school districts, and That's the most we do. It's nothing official, and they'll give us an idea of, do you have a structural deficit? Do you have these problems? And then we assess from there. But there's no official reporting required unless there is a deficit projected.
All right, so did you assess the Tiverton's financial situation in any of these years?
I can review the survey and let you guys know what we have there.
Thank you.
So we've received no notification that they would, and I think it's important to clarify what it means to deficit spend versus a structural deficit. Deficit spending, and I think the law that everyone is talking about refers really to if your budget to actuals are showing a deficit in the terms of the ongoing expenditures. And that's never been the case. But I'm going to ask Mr. Scungio to opine on that because we've actually sought, a legal opinion about that. And again, that's different from a structural deficit, which is when you know that you are providing services and some of those services are being provided by money that is available to the district by various means, which is taxpayers' money, and should therefore go to educating the taxpayers' children. So, Mr. Scungio, I think you can.
Thank you. So in 2012, Commissioner Wagner issued a guidance with respect to surplus. The district was blessed in that it had a carry-forward surplus that it's been applying for a number of years. And this was noted, from what I understand, to be in your budget. So with respect to deficit, that's a technical term on an annual basis as it's applied to Tiverton, in that the appropriation that you received wasn't equal to the amount of expenses that you incurred in the course of the year. What made that up was the carry-forward surplus that you have. And in Commissioner Wagner's guidance, he said the school committee is free to spend its surplus anyway at any time that it deems fit. So the school committee did that year to year to be able to continue the services.
And just to also be clear as well, this was discussed fully in our sessions, and every representation, every meeting we had before the budget committee, when it was the primary sort of budget creating or recommending entity in the town, and then again last year when we were before the town council and the budget committee, in terms of where our structural deficit was and why it was there and what we needed to try and close it. And again, I think I still have the floor. And this is something that we need to address. And school committee stands ready to try and meet with the town council, with the budget committee, with everybody we can to try and find a solution. And we recognize that the solution is going to be making cuts somewhere.
So Commissioner Wagner, and I don't disagree with your assessment of what Commissioner Wagner said. And nobody's begrudging the school committee of doing, and believe me, I'm not trying to cast any aspersions here because they've done a very good job of providing services with the monies that they had available. The issue is the monies are not available. And coming up with one-time monies to fix a one-time issue is a catastrophic issue financially for the town to have to wrestle with. And like I said, I agree that somehow we all need to sit down as grown-ups in a room to figure this out, but we can't backfill $4.7 million out of one-time funds. It just can't happen. This would wind up, and I did the calculations, if that expenditure run was incorporated into this year's budget, it would have been a 14.5% tax increase. We don't have the resources to backfill this. Our financial statements are open, they're public. I know that the most recent ones are going to be adopted by the town council very recently. We are not disputing what we have in reserves, but there are factors that go into those reserves. There are some things that go into restrictions on parts of those reserves that are real. So I don't disagree with what the commissioner said as it relates to spending a surplus, The issue is trying to backfill it when it's gone.
Absolutely, and I don't think any of us disagree there, that a structural deficit, and again,
Can I speak
just,
to that? Can I step on your toes just for a second?
absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Cotto. I just wanted to address your point. The problem, there are two issues from my point of view as an attorney representing a number of school districts across the state. One was from 16-17 in Tiverton, and this isn't on the town council. There were at least 4 years where there was no increase in local aid. Now, if you add that to the fact that you now have to live under a cap of 4%, that creates a substantial problem for the town council to try to fund that. You're right, and it's a very difficult issue. The other thing, though, with respect to the school committee that I hope everybody understands is by state law, the school committee is required to provide a certain level of services. That's the charge that the General Assembly gave them. So there's a tension every single year as to how much the town can afford and what the school committee has to provide its students. And that becomes the rub. And the final piece is, that I just wanted to mention, is the town council is now living under a responsibility it hadn't had before. Because before you had the voter initiative budgets, and they set the amount, not you guys. Perhaps you all would have done something different. But you are where you are right now, and the skill that you have to apply, that I know you all have, is to try to figure out how you get to an appropriation amount that serves the students, as well as doesn't break your budget.
Mr. Scungio, and I respect you very much, and I appreciate that. We have a responsibility to fund the town, not just the schools. And if I have a deficit, structural deficit in my accounts, in my spending, then I need to figure out how to lessen that over time, not simply to add one-time money, how to lessen that over time. And I need to make sure that if I get one-time funding, I use it for something similar to what we're doing with our ARPA funds. We're using it for capital. We're using it for one-time expenses that we know are not going to go forward into other operational years. So as it regards the voter-approved budgets that ended up in zero, many of us worked against that type of a budget. We weren't successful. That's how our government was structured at the time. So I think at that time, then everybody who got less than what they wanted had to go back and sharpen their pencils. And if that didn't, if that, people take pauses, Jerry.
I'm going to have John.
Well, I actually had the floor and I gave it to him, so.
All right. John is also.
Fine, Jerry. Go right ahead.
No, go, Mike, go.
Okay. John, would you? No. John had his hand up for quite some time.
So, my apologies, Dr. Larkin. I'll be very brief. So, if I understand you correctly, Mr. Attorney, based on the Commissioner Wagner's assessment, right, and the use of one-time funds, there was a surplus every single year leading up to this year, so no actual deficit under 45-22-12 existed. At what point, now that those one-time funds are gone, does that become a potential deficit? And this is where my concern lies, because we were given a budget number that said, hey, to keep services the same, it's $39 million, roughly, give or take. And right now, the budget is $35 million. So that $4.7 million swing seems to indicate a potential deficit. And the follow-on question to that is, at what point when this was noticed, should that notification have come to the town and then also to RIDE?
Second question first. I asked Amy about that. We met a couple minutes before your meeting. And every single year in the revenue side of the budget that was submitted to the town council, it was clear that surplus was going to be used to fill in a gap. So that was the notice that you all had at that time. With respect to the first part of your question, this is the year. So the state cut you, they're telling you they're cutting you $1.2 million. Your surplus has diminished substantially. So this is that year where you now are going to have to cut. The problem is substantially cutting services to students or closing down a school are the only two options that the school committee have ultimately. So if they don't close the school down, they are going to have to cut the services. Within 30 days of your appropriation, they have to come up with a budget that works. And in the process of doing that, sharpening the pencil, thinking outside the box, all those nice terms that we all like to use, ultimately, they're going to have to lay people off and diminish services for students. That's unfortunate, but it's what's going to have to happen, because you're right, you're limited by 4% unless you wish to give a gift to the school committee of more than 4%.
So
We can't,
No, you can. Legally, you can give more than 4% of the school committee's ask.
we seem
If
to,
you
we
wanted
seem to
to.
be straying a little bit further away from my actual question, which was in Rhode Island General Law, Section 452212.1, it says very clearly that one of the 4 conditions is immediately address potential deficits. So given that this is the year, I would like to know when, in your opinion, the school committee is supposed to notify both us and RIDE in compliance with Rhode Island general laws, which are pretty clear to me as a layperson. I'm not an attorney. So I'd just like to know when that was supposed to occur and like how we deal with that specific piece, because we want to follow the process here.
Okay. So I think the problem is there's a misunderstanding of that statute and how it's applied. Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, may I speak? Okay. So what this...
could we ask RIDE what their interpretation
You
is?
can, but let me answer the question first, because I've done this in many districts before. I've handled this issue probably a dozen times across the state. So the statute that you're referring to refers to a situation in which, no, for this fiscal year, you're not in deficit. For next year, you're not in deficit until you're in deficit. After you have an appropriation, the school district has a duty within 30 days to conform their budget to your appropriation. At that point, they move forward. When they come to the realization reasonably that they will incur a deficit at the end of next fiscal year or during the course of next fiscal year, they have 5 days to provide that notice. That's all on the Auditor General's website.
But what does the word potential mean then? I guess is what I'm getting at.
They don't have an appropriation from you guys yet, so they don't know whether or not they're going to incur a deficit. They also,
It's pretty
Pretty clear that we cannot take care of that.
which means the school committee has to cut its budget, which it will do. So it may not incur a deficit at all. They're going to be required to cut something. The problem is those cuts are painful. That's why there are people in the audience today, because they understand the kind of pain that may happen, and none of the alternatives at this point are palatable. That's the issue that you people have, that you have to resolve.
I do want to say something, though. They have come to us for a couple of years now and explained that they needed more money, and we have given them a percentage, and they've spent over that percentage. And then they came to us again, and we gave them some money, and they spent over that percentage. I really don't understand where they think that money was going to come from, because the town has gotten a lot less, and we have tried our best. Where did they think that money was going to come from? And we even said last year, 2 years in a row, and we were all there, what are you doing? Like, they told us that we're spending more than we're getting. Well, then you need to fix that. We said that. Because we don't have $4 million. And to take and give them more than 4%, we have to run a town. We have to run a fire department, a police department, a DPW department. We can't take from there. That's safety issues also. So once you overspend to this point, of course you have to cut, because there's nowhere else to get the money. But you have to think about the cuts and cause the less damage that you possibly can. And that's my opinion.
So again, just to go back to
Excuse me, Mr. Chair.
the history.
The only point that I want to make quickly, I'm sorry, is that the district over the past 4 years has cut 37.7 staff positions. So they have cut, but everyone has to understand that the General Assembly requires the school committee to provide a certain level of student services at the same time. And they're struggling with that just as you're struggling with that, and it is a frustrating situation. But you'll get over it if you set if you sit and talk and make decisions about it.
So Ben, and Mr. Scargio, I don't, we've given the school committee $4 million over the last 5 years. They've received another $7.4 million on top of that from other sources. And we've cut that many people? I'm baffled by this. I really am. I would love to see the unemployment cost for this.
Amy can provide you with a list of the staff that's been cut.
We would like that, please.
Okay.
So just to, first of all, Mike, I apologize if I offended you. Would you like the mic?
No.
You sure?
You know better than I do, Jerry.
I know some things. I'm not saying I know better than anybody about anything, but just to address actually part of your kind of concerns, you said, if there is a structural deficit, you should be trying to address it. And in fact, the school committee has done that, in part by starting in 2018, discussing it fully in open session, discussing it before every budget committee, before every financial town meetings when we were having those. The fact of the matter is we did not get, in most years, what we requested. There was one petitioner's budget that gave us, I think, 5% in either 19 or 20. No, it was 18 or 19. So, the school committee has tried to address this. One of the watershed years remains 2020 or FY21, the year of COVID. Everyone remembers that. So we asked for 4%. We were voted 2% by the budget committee, and we actually wound up getting 0. The budget was not even adopted until September because it was unclear what the tax revenues were going to be like. It turned out, I believe, that they actually were better than everyone expected. But in fact, that was the creation of a structural deficit. We had, or the addition to the structural deficit, we had contractual obligations to our teachers, to our staff, to our vendors for transportation, energy, rising costs in special education, additional costs from COVID, some of which were covered by ARPA or ESSER money, but we tried to address it. We try to address it every year with our requests, and we have not been successful in the long run. On the other hand, yes, the school committee very intentionally took the votes, again, in open session to use other revenue sources, usually carryovers from the year before. Some of it was Medicaid money, some of it was ESSER money, to try to maintain services to the level that we thought was appropriate to the needs of the students. Finally, to Mr. Edwards' point about when are you required to make a report to RIDE, again, that law deals with budgets to actuals. But if you say you anticipate a structural deficit, I would turn it right around and say, well, RIDE, you just gave us a structural deficit. They're giving us a structural deficit every time there's a project, not RIDE, actually it's the governor's proposed budget, whether the budget, the funding formula, whatever the budget that is enacted winds up being, that has created a $1.2 million structural deficit. If everything was great, if we had full funding up through this year, the projection has created a $1.2 million structural deficit. If you, kind of add in that 0% in FY21 when we had still contractual obligations that were going to cause our costs to rise, that's a structural deficit. The other $300,000 basically, or $500,000 basically over the last 3 to 4 fiscal years creates a structural deficit. We're not asking you to come up with $4.7 million. We know that that's impossible. We know that you can't exceed the cap. What we're asking you, and I'm asking the committee, the school committee, I'm asking the town council to meet with us and sort of say, let's figure out what we're going to do.
Well, we are.
Because arguing about it's not going to help anybody.
Right.
Go ahead.
There is a budget process. There is a budget process. It's all in the referendum. It's in the charter. We are going to meet. We meet every year. We are going to set a date. Right now, we have 2 budget hearings set, and we're going to hear the town's budget, because we're going to need a whole day for you, we think. So, yes, so once we get, because no one's heard from the town budget yet, and that has to be submitted to us in a couple of days, I believe, next week. So once we do that. But I do want to say, the town hasn't got what we wanted also the last few years. We have had a budget, and we have had a big increase, and we have took the pencil and reduced our budget. And when they say, sorry, you can't get 4%, you get 2%, we have a meeting, we go through every line item, and we cut. And when you cut every year, it's not so devastating when you wait this long. We've taken one-time funds, and we have not put it in operational. We have cut when we needed to. We didn't give raises that were appropriate because we didn't have the money to do so. So I just want to make it clear, the town didn't get everything they wanted either for the last few years. And they didn't get it also when those devastating budgets, we didn't get what we wanted also. It's not only the schools. Deb?
And then I think Ms. Farnworth would like to talk.
Oh, I thought you were going to say more. Okay, Deb?
So I just want to remind everyone, it's our budget. It's town and school. It's not an us and a them, it's an our budget. We're responsible for everyone. But my question, Mrs. Scanzio, is we have a maintenance of effort with the schools. So you had alluded to we could go over the 4% cap. And if we do that, 5%, 6%, or whatever, and I'm not saying we're entertaining that, we haven't even met yet, is that something that we're held to with the maintenance of effort every year going forward?
Yeah.
Thank you.
If that's a question for RIDE, that would be, on the surface, yes. The municipality is, according to MOE, cannot reduce its funding one year to the next. Once you reach a place, unless there's a one-time extraordinary expenditure that has been and is approved by the commissioner, which has happened certainly several times since I've been there, then that would be exempt from the maintenance of effort. That would be a major boiler repair or something along those lines that would not be a recurring expenditure. But if the monies requested are for recurring expenditures, it would be held to the MOE standard. That's what would happen.
I just want to thank Mrs. Janik for reminding us all that we are one town, and our town council has the authority as well as the responsibility to budget for the entire town. That includes the schools, the police, the fire, the DPW, and so on. It is a daunting task. I respect that they need to go through this task and think through it deliberately, but I will also remind everyone we are one town.
I'd also, can I go next? Is that all right? All right, thank you. So revisionist history is important, but history always is boring, right? So I think what amongst the groans and the anger is people want to move forward, right? They don't want to keep going backward. So some of what we understand is making sure that people know the story. I know that I understand I want to do something that moves forward to make this right. And we have a very different varies of opinion, but I think everyone up here wants to do the right thing for the town. The town's the operative word. Many people that are sitting up here have been on the budget committee when the Budget Committee was tasked with actually handing out the revenues to certain departments and setting the budget. And one thing that I want to make sure that people know is that either closing a school or laying off dozens of people isn't a good feeling for someone that volunteered to come here to try to make a positive difference. So what I can tell you is, this will be the last thing I say tonight, just as a personal adult, I will make sure that I keep listening to feedback and do the best I can possibly do to make sure that we can keep lines of communication open and we can come to a decision that everyone has to live with. No matter what it may be, it'll be what we have to live with. So that's my final thought. Thank you.
Well, that's why we're here. We're actually not here to debate the budget.
I agree. I'm just not sure if there's,
Trying to keep us on
so we should probably try
task.
and focus on questions to them.
But, did you have a question, Jim?
I was just going to say to Catherine, Mark, Steve, obviously the town is wrestling and has a lot of different questions. I know there's a memo that I drafted, has a lot of very pointed questions, and it's not a reflection of what the school committee has done or what the town council has done. It's a matter of trying to get all the information. And I would ask that the best that you can over the next couple of days, try to craft some answers for us so that we can at least get those into our own records. And we do appreciate your thoughtful responses today and the ability to come and explain the formulary to us to the best of your ability so far. So obviously, we weren't looking for firm answers on every question tonight, but at some point, we would at least, if you can answer them, to get them to us, and we'll distribute them among the community.
I have
Definitely
another.
will do that.
I have another question. They submitted a budget that was 9.8%. Are they supposed to only submit a budget 4%? Like to ride? Like we got their submittal, and it's not.
No, they can submit a budget for whatever they need. I mean, that's the whole point,
They can
So-
submit it,
so,
but
Mark, if you look at 16.221, it states that the district has to present a budget no greater than 4% of the current year. Doesn't mean they can't give us a separate budget saying, okay, well, we met the 4%, and here's what it would look like, and then give us the additional, here's what we really think we're really asking for. But I think state law is clear that they have to present us with a 4%, no more than a 4% budget.
no, I have a budget here.
But this budget doesn't reflect that.
No.
Okay, that's.
But that's
So,
what we have to go on.
This budget that was given to the school, the town council, went from their operating budget is a year-to-year increase of $3.55 million, which is a 9.88% increase. This is not a 4% budget, no matter how you look at it. It's very clear on your first page.
So
I don't have it in front of me. Is the
I think-
budget increase of the total or of the city, of the town contribution
No.
to the?
It is
What is
the
that?
town contribution.
So I believe the only thing that binds the council and the school committee, for that matter, is what we voted, which was 4%. So
But why doesn't this reflect that?
I'm not sure which.
A number of 4% is not a budget. A budget is a budget.
So I will say that Dr. Sanchioni did send a letter that did represent a 4% increase.
Right,
The
but-
budget book, I think what Dr. Sanchioni would suggest was created in November. It wasn't what the school committee had adopted. They adopted a 4% level increase. They just provided the detail
But why
for,
doesn't-
I'll let Dr. Sanchioni speak to that.
Why aren't we looking at a 4% increase instead of a 9.8? Because that's what this budget book reflects. I know what the letter says.
I don't know if you want to ask the superintendent to address that, but the book itself is trying to, it's detailed, but anyway, I believe the thing that, again, binds you and binds us is the vote that was taken, which, as Mr. Cotta outlined, was 4% over the local levy. Peter, I don't know if you have anything you
But
want to say
shouldn't we
about that.
see a budget that reflects that 4% with the line items that reflect that 4%? Instead of line items that reflect the 9.8.
I think, Ms. deMedeiros, this is where we're in a little bit of a catch-22.
Yeah.
We, as a school committee, as we've been communicating, are faced with a couple of options that have already been put on the table. Other discussions continue to happen. We won't know what our final adopted budget will be until we have an appropriation. It is a bit of a catch-22. We can draft a what will it be if we do this, what will it be if we do that, but at the end of the day, that won't become permanent until we have an appropriation.
And I respect that, having sat in your seat for many years. At the same time, when we presented budgets to the Budget Committee, because Chris was the Budget Committee chair for a good part of this, we presented the details. We didn't just give a number of 4%. We presented the details so the Budget Committee could go through line by line and say, okay, here's where we think maybe you can think about reducing. And we would go back and say, okay, yeah, we could, or no, we can't. This, and that was, no more than the 4%. If we thought we needed more, we would make that known, but we still had to present that budget. So I respect that, but I still think that we need to see a detailed 4% budget that represents what your thinking is on what it would look like for your services. So that's all I'm saying. I'm not saying you can't give us this as the 4% plus, but we need to see that level of detail.
And Mr. Burke, I think that's a fair request.
Yeah, and with the actual, it would help if we had what you actually spent, like what you budgeted and what you've spent, and if there's anything left over on any of the accounts. Because I think you've been to our meetings where we go through every line and say, hey, look at this. We gave so much money for electric. We only spent this much. Could we minus it?
Yeah.
So I don't think we should be responsible for
No.
doing that. And we need your priorities, and we need a budget that says, well, 4%, this is our priorities. This is what we want within the 4%.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And this is perhaps the place where we start the conversation of trying to figure out what we do. I think it'd be really useful to look at how the books closed each of the last 5 fiscal years, look at the trends of those, what will constitute 95% or 97% of any of our budget, which is going to be the salaries, special education, transportation, energy, missing something. But, there's 5 or 6, and look at what those trends have been over the last 5 years, and look again at how we supplemented the state aid and the revenue that we, received from the legislature and from the town with the one-time funds. That's a great place to start to understand exactly where we are. And and again, I do believe that the only thing that holds either the town council or the school committee is the vote we took, which was 4% of the local levy.
We did put a request in to the superintendent after the school committee meeting last week that we would like, the town council meeting, the budget actuals for 2019 through 25.
Yeah.
And we asked that it includes ESSER, Medicaid, reimbursements, and all expenses. So maybe and that would be helpful for you as well as us.
Absolutely. And to that point, our meeting on the 23rd, which, I hope you guys can come and Budget Committee can come and whoever else wants to come. Because I recognize that a lot of people, in a way, are just tuning in, that haven't, I guess this sort of blood sport of a hobby of local politics that some of us are engaged in. A lot of people have been, happy to not have to sort of think about this stuff, and now they are thinking about it a little bit more. So it bears repeating, a lot of what we went through. I mean, if you are having trouble sleeping, go look at all our tapes. But we went through a series of meetings last fiscal year, starting really in August and going all the way through the entire budget committee or budget season, trying to figure out how to grapple with this. Certainly all of our meetings about the budget since December, where we've had our technology director, our special education director, our principals, obviously the superintendent himself, sort of all present, detail to their budget. If there's a thirst for understanding that more, those tapes are useful to look at. But we will recapitulate it again at our meeting on the 23rd so that we all sort of have a common place to start from.
Do we have any more questions for RIDE so we can let them go home? Are you there, or did you leave?
No, I'm still here.
All right.
Yeah, the whole team is here.
All right, well,
So
we want to thank you
have-
very much. And like Chris said, we'd appreciate you getting back to us with some of these questions. And
And
thank,
let me just ask you, what's the best way to get that information to you?
send it to the town administrator, please,
And to the superintendent.
and to the superintendent.
Okay.
I'll send you my email contact tomorrow.
Thank you.
Don't send it to me.
I also want to thank the state delegation that's here. I don't know if you have anything further to add. I don't think you want to.
Come on.
But
really-
thank you.
the
I
water's warm.
appreciate you coming, and thank you for listening to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You're welcome. It was a pleasure. Have a good night. Good luck.
Okay. They just left. Oh, you want to ask them a question? If you want to. Who do you want to ask it to? All right, go ahead. Deb wants to ask the state delegation a question.
So the state does unfunded mandates. So we have these services that we need to provide. We're mandated to provide them, and I'm not questioning the usefulness, the importance. But if you could float us some financial assistance with some of those, it would be helpful, because honestly, we can't just add these and add on to our taxes. We have to cut something else. And it may be something that's equally important, however, it's not mandated. So it kind of goes by the wayside. So that's my first ask. And my second ask, we're mandated to provide bus services for all of our students. We're mandated to have a seat for every child. Many children don't take the bus. I don't have an issue with us having a seat because in case of an emergency, we need every child to have a seat to be transported. We have 2 companies in the state that provide bus transportation. It's not a monopoly per se, but they never bid against each other. One takes half of the state, the other takes the other half of the state, and we're pretty much held hostage to what they tell us we have to pay. And the cost, and I'm not on the school committee, I'm not privileged to as much information, not as well-versed, but the costs have gone up substantially over the years, is what we've heard. If we could have any kind of assistance with that. We have master price list, and so there's a lot of companies and a lot of services that get vetted. The bus services, because they're mandated, and importantly, mandated, if we could have some kind of control on those costs. So those are my questions. Thank you. My request.
Mike?
Thank you. A sidebar question I wanted to ask, I think is pertinent to this whole exercise. I wanted to ask Ms. Roderick if we have any news regarding the forensic audit that's supposed to be coming, if it started, when it might start, if it hasn't. Is that fair? Is that okay?
I have not been contacted in any manner about the forensic audit.
They've met with the treasurer and myself. They set a scope of work. They actually, I think one of the members is here tonight. They will be contacting you shortly.
Okay. Any other comments from the council, John?
Yeah, I just want to say, I mean, now that we're all up here on the stage, I know we've had a couple of meetings, thrown some shots back and forth at each other. I'm glad that we've come to the, conclusion that we do need to work together in order to solve this problem, and it is a substantial problem that we have to address. So I'm very happy to hear that the school committee is behind producing all the information that the council was looking for and, taking a look at it themselves so that we can figure out what the solution is here, because ultimately that's what everybody in the crowd wants to see is some kind of a solution. So thank you, Dr. Larkin and the other members of the school committee for agreeing to, come to the table and provide that.
I didn't open it to the public. This was an information meeting for all of us to meet with RIDE. I will let a couple of people come up if it has anything to do with this, but if, what's the matter? All right.
I think there's going to be plenty of other opportunities.
No, I think, while I'm looking around, it doesn't look like anyone's running to the microphone. So, okay. Yep, you can come up. Please speak about,
Hi.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes. My name is Nadine DeMello. I live at 69 Ford Farm Road. I'm just a little confused about the 27.9% attrition rate in students, which caused our enrollment to decrease amongst more affluent parents, apparently. I don't think he's there any longer to be able
No.
to say anything
But we
about
can
that.
send a question to him.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Why is it that we're not considering cutting pre-K and the bus routes versus combining other?
Well, that's a
Great.
question. I know the school committee is looking at everything as a whole, and it might be that, like, I can't speak for them, but I'm sure they're looking at every line item and looking to what they can reduce. Jerry, do you want to, am I right?
We're required by state law not only to bus our students, but actually to bus students to certain parochial schools if they're within a area of.
I asked about pre-K.
Oh, pre-K.
Pre-K?
The pre-K program that was added while we had a deficit.
The pre-K was added in.
Dr. Sanchioni
Yeah,
said we had a
we're not
deficit in
gonna,
2018.
yeah, we're
so-
not going to get into this a lot.
Yeah, I'll try and be as brief as I can. Pre-K was added, I want to say, in 2014. And there is an early risers program, which I think runs a modest profit. If you look at educationally, where do your dollars actually have their greatest impact? It's going to be in actually early childhood education. I'll leave it at that.
Early childhood education starts at home.
All right, well, thank you. Thank you.
I have two more questions. They're quick.
Okay.
Dr. Sanchioni, are you willing to cut your staff? Your
So
administration?
I
Yeah, we're
cannot,
not gonna
I
get into
cannot
this.
allow any questions or
No,
discussion of
I don't want to
personnel.
get into this today.
Okay, and will that budget be available to all of us?
What
with
budget?
detail?
The one,
The one that
yes.
was discussed?
Every
Yes.
budget
That will be
document is a
posted
public document, and you have
online.
access to it.
Whatever we receive,
How
will-
we actually,
And I'm
you know,
just curious
there's a lot of
why
things
we're
we
on
can
a
post.
cash basis rather than an accrual basis,
I don't really
accrual method. But maybe you could answer that another time.
As I mentioned to Mr. Edwards, that's required by GAAP for the governmental
piece.
funds, and the enterprise funds are on the accrual basis.
But why are we on a cash basis otherwise?
Because generally accepted accounting principles require that.
I don't believe so.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I think it's time for adjournment.
yeah, I'm going to ask for a motion to adjourn.
Oh, wait a minute. Real quick, I think I stopped you last time. Yeah.
Hi, Denise Miller, 47 Tanglewood Drive.
Yeah, I know.
So what happened up here is definitely much appreciated. It should have happened a while ago, but that's have-nots. But you cannot go forward with the two options that we have. You have to come up with another option to present to the public, to the people that are here, okay? Because obviously it's well known that there's some discretion discrepancies going on in the budget, and it needs to be discovered, and hopefully you guys can figure that out amongst yourselves. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, so, Jerry, do you want to adjourn?
Yeah, I'm going to ask for a motion.
Hi, my name's Pat Ford. I do media. I cover school board meetings around the state. And I'll ask you the question I've asked other school boards. Why is the first option that's always thrown to the public the nuclear option? It's why?
Yeah, we're not.
It strikes me that what we often see is a play to people's emotions and fear, as opposed to having an analysis of whether it be
Give me a
outside
minute.
income potential, other
Sir.
sources of income besides
Sir.
taxpayers. Why?
I asked that we speak on what's on the agenda.
This is
That-
ultimately what's on the
that's-
agenda,
no.
isn't it? Isn't that ultimately the question here?
Well, that's-
Aren't people being threatened through the use of fear tactics with the closing of the school?
So the
What could be
school,
more agenda
so the
focused?
school committee has looked at everything that we can. We continue to
They didn't want me
receive ideas from people. We continue to generate ideas among ourselves. And the reason why the cuts are as big as they are is because that's where our deficit is. So
No, I understand why the
appreciate your-
deficit, and it was explained in detail. But the problem here is that the first reaction is always an overreaction. If there's a budget cut, let's cut the football team, as opposed to having a cogent analysis. And I'm going to ask you for the record, are there other sources of income besides the state of Rhode Island Department of Education, and, for example, town taxpayers being considered? And what have they been since you're fielding ideas? We often hear in reporting where people are always, the governor, for example, is very happy to tell us he's willing to field ideas about a bridge, yet he never seems to talk about any of them. So have you considered other sources of income? Thank you.
So if I may, I just want to point out, and while I am not happy with the proposal on the school, this school committee has not proposed that in the past. So your generalization is not based in fact here. There was a school, but we're not going back and forth, sir.
No, we're not.
There was a school building that was closed years ago when the two of us were on there, but there's not been a proposal to close a school in Tiverton since that time. So your sweeping generalization does not apply. I appreciate and the concerns that our taxpayers have in that regard. So I appreciate that. In terms of other revenues, both the town and the school committee consistently look outside for other revenues that can support the work. The problem is many other revenue sources do not cover operational expenses.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask for a motion to adjourn the school committee meeting, the school committee.
I'll second that motion.
Is there a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Okay. I'm going to ask for a vote. Mr. Dakotas?
Yes.
Mrs. Pavo?
Yes.
Mrs. Farnworth?
Yes.
I vote we are adjourned. I vote yes, we're adjourned.
Motion to,
One other person had their hands up, and we still have his name. Yeah, I know.
you too, Beth. Take care. No, you're fine, you're fine.
All right, so, I don't think anyone else wants to. All right, I'd like to entertain a motion, once I find my agenda.
Right here, just use mine.
I'd like to entertain a motion to go into, could everybody just keep it down for just 2 more minutes? To go into executive session, Town Administrator, Rhode Island General Law 42465A, collective bargaining, update on IAFF and Local 1703 negotiations.
So moved.
Do I have a second? Second. Dennis?
Yes.
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 And now,
You can use the library.
oh, they also got us another one.